in case.
It was. So here's why I think these are harder, because they flip this one upside down, and you can have a cladogram either direction, and they love to flip them up and down, because remember, the people who make these tests are not your friends. They're kind of evil, honestly. So here you've got the list of characteristics, and you've got the list of organisms. You have to figure out where these things evolved. So here's the first evil trick they pull. Well, first of all, let's say that whatever's going to go in here is something that is true for everybody except green algae. And if we look up here, so green algae only has one thing that's true for it. We know immediately it can't be the thing that's true for green algae, because, all right, so it's got to be cuticle, because cuticle is true for every group except the green algae. So that first one is cuticle. Now, why is this one, why do they have an evil one? Because they have pluses here for everything, and we're used to thinking, well, whatever the lowest thing is true for everybody. But what they did here, there's no box that would be true for everybody. It starts with something that's not true for one group. So the next thing that we're looking for, now that we're past that little bit of evil, the next thing that we're looking for is going to be true for everybody except mosses. So let's look at mosses here. There are two things that are true for mosses. And if we look for something that's true for everybody but mosses, it looks like this one. Actually, true for everybody but mosses and green algae. So that's vascular tissue. Again, you don't have to know what these things are in order to use the cladogram. Now, we're looking for something that is true for conifers, monocots, dicots, and not for ferns, mosses, or algae. So let's look at ferns, mosses, and algae. It has to be something that's not true for any of them. We only have two choices. These are the only things that aren't true for any of those three. We're looking for something that is true for all the other groups, and that would be seeds. So that's 4.
Oh, I got one right.
And then when for our last one, we want something that is true for monocots and dicots and not true for anyone else. So what do we have that's true for monocots and dicots and not true for anyone else? That's flowers.
I got it all right. Let's go.
All right, this is actually the one that I thought the first time I read these was the trickiest, because you have both gain and loss of something. So the table lists the presence or absence of genes for 2 proteins, different animal groups. Yeah, I think it is too. Use the data to determine when genes for these proteins appeared or were lost. And that's the part that I think is so much harder. So we have chickens, platypuses, kangaroos, and lions. And the first thing that we're looking for is going to be true for platypuses, kangaroos, and lions, and not true for chickens. So I need something that's the same for platypus, kangaroo, and lion, and different for chickens. Well, it's casein. It's this protein. Now the question is, did that gene get gained or lost after chickens? It got gained.
Why did they make these and...
So the next thing that we're going to look at is something that has to be the same for kangaroos and lions and the same for chickens and platypuses. So we've got here, well, let's see, for vitellogenin, we have a 2-2 split. And that gene is present in chickens and platypus and absent in kangaroos and lions. So we know it's vitellogenin. Did that gene, was it gained or was it lost? It was lost.
Yeah, I might want to mix around.
So that one is the V, lost. Is there anything that's only true for the lion? No. That box will be left blank. I am also not a big fan of when they leave boxes blank, but I guess they have to do that.
Yeah, I put the opposite.
You put gained and lost.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they do some kind of partial credit. I don't know. But if the gene is present, it would have been gained, but you were going in backwards direction. So I think this one's pretty easy. So here we're given the cladogram, and we have to fill in the chart from it. So we're going to start, obviously, here. I guess we always start at the left and we read left to right, no matter if it's, looks upside down or backwards or downside up. Start left, read to the right, okay? Just like you read. So which groups here have vertebrae?
Oh.
Everybody. Check, 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 check. The next characteristic we're looking at is two pairs of limbs. Which groups is that true for?
All of them besides the sharks.
Okay, everybody but the sharks. Now we're looking at mammary glands. Okay, so somebody I haven't heard from, Robert. Chimps and kangaroos have mammary glands. Mammary glands are the glands that produce milk for offspring. So that's what mammals have. It's one of the things mammals have, that and fur. Reduced. So you don't have to know what any of these things are. It could be purple fuzzy whatsits. It doesn't matter. You just have to be able to use the cladogram and the chart. Now, placenta. And we covered what a placenta is yesterday. Which group has a placenta? Faith, go for it. Chimps. Chimps have placentas. Nobody else does. The kangaroos are mammals, but they're marsupial mammals.
Wait,
So this one I think is also tricky. And the reason is you got two options to start. All right, so there are two places you could start. There are two places that you could start here. So our first organism has got no segments and 4 legs. And we know we're going to add one feature at a time. Well, this one adds one feature, and so does this. So at a first glance, it looks as though both of those are options. But, in fact, only one of them is. Why? Go for it, Faith.
Because the gene will carry on, and that one on the bottom will carry on with the rest.
I think you know what you're talking about, but try to explain it better.
Everything else after that would have had 6 legs, but they don't.
Okay, and that's, I think, what you were trying to say. We don't see 6 legs in any of the other groups. So we know it can't be that one. So this has to be the first one in sequence. And what's the characteristic that's added? Segments. And then we can add antenna, and we can note, whoops, segments is there. There we go. Antenna, and I'm just going to shorten that to antenn. And then wings would be the last feature that we add. So here we've got, this is another one where, they always say there may be more than one correct answer, and there are in fact 2 correct answers on this one. Now they didn't say that on the last one because there weren't. There's only one way to do that one right.
Wait, what?
So, a cladogram of several members of the phylum Arthropoda shown 2 new species, X and Y, have been discovered. Shows the trait the new species possess. Move X and Y into the appropriate boxes. May be more than one correct answer. Oh. So, if we look at species X, it has an exoskeleton, compound eyes, mandibles, but it doesn't have antennae. So, where on this cladogram would we have something that's got an exoskeleton, compound eyes, and mandibles, but no antenna? Right there. It's the only place X can go. Now, when we look at species Y, on the other hand, it's got everything there. It's got exoskeletons, compound eyes, mandibles, antenna. Now, we don't We are not told that it has a head, thorax, or abdomen, but it doesn't matter because there are no blanks above that. What we know is that it has to go above antenna. So it could go, I'll do this in a different color. It could go there. That would be one correct answer. Where's the other correct answer? You're nodding your head, kid. Can you see it on your own screen? Do you have this pulled up? Okay, so it could go there also because there's nothing that we see here that differentiates those two boxes. So either of those would be a correct location for Y. All right, here we've got a cladogram. We're asked which conclusion is supported. Valeroy and Rose are the most closely related. Well, they're common ancestors there. Rose and Cylindra are the most closely related. They're common ancestors there. Cupula and Valeroy are the most closely related. Their common ancestor, Cupuloi and Valeroy, their common ancestor is there. And the last one, which I managed to cut off somehow, was Cylindra and Cupuloi, I believe. So obviously B is our choice. These are the two that are most closely related. Most people do pretty well using these, like this. Okay, here we've got 4 different cladograms. We're asked which one supports the relationship or which shows the relationship that has been found, where we now know that hippos and dolphins are very closely related. Hippos are basically chubby land-bound whales. Well, this shows deer and hippos as the closest relations. This shows hippos and camels as the closest relations. This shows deer and dolphins as closely related. This is the only one that shows hippos and dolphins as the most related of those groups. Okay, this one is tough because we haven't talked about speciation and gene flow yet. So, speciation is when you have 2 species that emerge out of one ancestral species. Gene flow is when they meet up to swap genetic material. And if 2 groups, 2 populations are separated by something, they can't meet up and swap genetic material. On this map of California, the Central Valley in California is very hot and dry. That is not good for salamanders. And salamanders need moist and cool. So they tend to live up in the mountains on either side of the Central Valley, and they can't cross over. They can't ever go on a date with a salamander from the other side of the valley. It's not going to happen. So what we have is one founding population, and members of that population end up producing a couple other species in the mountain ranges to the west of the Central Valley. They also have individuals that travel down the east side of the Central Valley and produce a couple of new species. So we're asked to put in a cladogram. Now, the first time I saw this question, I was just being stupid, and I kept trying to figure out, things based on dots. It's all about geography. Which of these species would have led to the others? We're looking at when they would have had a common ancestor. Well, we know that there are 3 species on this side of the valley, and lo and behold, we've got 3 species that are more closely related. That's going to be those 3. Now, we don't know the order yet. We'll get there. We've got 2 species on this side of the valley, and here we have 2 species that are most closely related. So we're going to go ahead and put L and N in there because we know those 2 species will be more closely related to one another than to the other species. So on the other side, however, there is a difference. We know that O and P are going to be more closely related than P and M. They would have had a more recent common ancestor. So O and P in any order, it could be O and P, it could be P and O, have to be these 2. And then M is going to be the ancestor species they split off from. Okay, remember how I said that there was going to be at least one where there was a vocabulary word that we hadn't talked about? This is it. Clade. So a clade is an ancestor and all its descendants. So we're looking for the smallest clade that includes species X. Now, we could say, well, here's a common ancestor, here are all its descendants, that's a clade, but that doesn't include species X. So that doesn't fit our criteria. here's a common ancestor of species X and these two. So this would be a clade that includes species X. So we want to check those two boxes. That would be the correct answer. Okay. This table shows derived traits of 5 plant groups. Which trait was the earliest to appear? We're just looking for the one that's got the most organisms that have that trait, because that would have been the earliest to appear. What is it, Dylan? Okay, so because stomata is the one that most groups have, that's the one that we would assume is the oldest shared derived characteristic. Now, this one I thought was really challenging because we have to figure out both organisms and traits. So the first thing I'm going to do here is process of elimination. Because there are 2 organisms here that have hair and nobody else has hair. So I'm going to zoom into this chart and I'm going to look at hair, and I know that the 2 organisms that have hair have to go in those boxes. So that's A and E are going to go there. And now I have eliminated 2. That was easy. I'm sorry. So now I want to look for something that's got a backbone and nothing else, because that's got to be whatever is there. So let's look at organisms that have backbones. Well, that's got all kinds of stuff. That one's done anyway. That's got 2 things. That doesn't have anything. Oh, look at that. F. So I know that F has to be the one that's got a backbone and nothing else. Well, what is it that F doesn't have and everybody else does? What's the one thing that everybody but F and C. Everybody but F and C have. Oh, 4 limbs. Okay. So now I'm down to B and D, and I'm down to eggs with shells. So let's look here. So who has eggs with shells? Just D, because this has to be eggshells. So that has to be D. Let's check. So I think this has to be B, but let's double check ourselves. If that's true, B would have a backbone and 4 limbs, and that's it. And lo and behold, backbone and 4 limbs. So that is, in fact, B. This is, you don't have to go in order on these, and process of elimination is your friend. Okay, last one. Cladogram of evolutionary relationships. Which grouping of organisms includes an ancestor and all its descendants? Guess what? That's a clade. So M and O, well, that would be here, but that doesn't include P, and that's a descendant of the same ancestor as O, so that's not it. Bogus. NOP, that would include this common ancestor and all the descendants. That's looking positive, but let's double check. O, P, and R, nope, because that doesn't include these guys and this one, and they're descendants of the same ancestor. PRS, nope, because it doesn't include descendants, so it is B. All right, questions.